Welcome, welcome. There's so many folks here. I'm so pleased. Thank you so much to everyone who could join us for what is our inaugural Jake MacDonald Writer-in-Residence reading. And we're so lucky tonight to have the wonderful Erín Moure with us as our first ever Jake MacDonald Writer-in-Residence here at U Winnipeg. I just want to start, as always, first by reminding folks that the Department of English here at the University of Winnipeg acknowledges that we live and work in the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe peoples. Treaty 1, signed in 1871, took this territory from 7 local Anishinaabe First Nations in order to make the land available for settler use and ownership. I'd also like to personally acknowledge that I grew up in Erin, Ontario, which is on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe people, which I believe is part of Treaty 19. And also that I happen to today be Zooming you from the beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, which is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen Songhees peoples. And I just wanted to start by introducing also the Jake MacDonald program. For those of you who might not know, we do have another Writer-in-Residence program at the university. It's called the Carol Shields Writer-in-Residence program. But this particular residency is honoring the memory of the beloved Manitoba writer, Jake MacDonald, who wrote short stories, he wrote essays, plays, and books of nonfiction. And he also passed away far too soon, and that was on January 30th, 2020. And through the generosity of Jake's family and her friends and peers, we've been able to really establish this program to make possible the kind of work that Jake believed in. So things like mentoring emerging writers, bringing readers to the university for events for the public, and also providing support for working writers to contact other writers and also to work on their works in process, which of course Erín is doing a very impressive job for us this semester at U Winnipeg. And I'd like to think actually that Erín is exactly the kind of writer, a boundary pushing writer that Jake would have been really thrilled to have as part of the residency. And all of this is possible by the Jake MacDonald Writers Fund, which began with a very generous gift from Jake's friend, Angus Reid. So that's the origin of the program. And I also just want to, before we start, promote the second event in the series, which is so exciting. We are having an international writers panel, which is a conversation between Erín Moure and the international writer Carolyn Bergfall. And that's going to be on November 20th, which I believe is a Saturday, just for your calendars. And we're going to start promoting that as soon as this event is finished. But just so you know, it is on a Saturday.
And in the afternoon on Saturday too.
It's the afternoon, right?
In Canada, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and no, it's great. And that's the idea that the reason I've introduced this into this particular residency is to try to promote discussions and collaborations between Canadian writers and international writers. And so the idea is just to get Canadians into more international conversations and also to bring international writers to the university that we may not ordinarily have access to. So those will probably be online events. So just so that I think it's going to be incredibly interesting. So November 20th in the afternoon, and you can check the Writer-in-Residence page for the info, which is going to be out very, very soon. Just a quick note on the format. It's 20 minutes of a reading and then a fairly brief Q&A. I would like to encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom instead of the chat function, just so that it's easier for me to sort of collect all of your thoughts in one spot. And I'm going to try to get to as many questions as I can. So I think that's all the admin for now. So yes, that's everything. So I'm now thrilled to introduce our first ever Jake MacDonald Writer-in-Residence, Erín Moure. I have loved Erin's work for a really, really long time, and I was so lucky to ask her to be the Writer-in-Residence this year. But I think my favorite description of her writing actually comes from one of my students. I had my students read her book, The Elements, which I have here, which you should all purchase. And the link is on the chat as well, so that you know where to find the book. And so one of my students, when I asked for a review of the book, just took a deep breath and said that the book was just mind-blowing, like her brain was blown apart in a million different directions at once. And another student noted that I can't quite figure out what this book is, but I am obsessed with reading it over and over again and trying to figure it out. And I love these reactions because I, at 19, was also blown away, and I'm still blown away by Erin's work. I'm perpetually blown away by innovative forms that Erín is using, by culturally relevant translations, her interest in civic space and the individual and community, and also the continual pushing against these white monolingual standards of knowing. Specifically, her book reminds me of the definition of Lynn Heginian, the scholar and writer, what Lynn Heginian would call an open text. That's a text where all of the elements of the work are maximally excited, and where the text itself both acknowledges the vastness of the world and is also formally differentiating. Erín Moure's work is a work that really provides an opening to a reader. I also agree with the reviewer from the Toronto Star who wrote that Moure is not only a dazzling postmodern experimentalist, but that she never fails to tackle the big questions. One only really needs to look at this new book, The Elements, to see how that really plays out, I suppose. It's described as a family book, a thinker's biography in poetry, and also a polylingual homage. The book places poems about Moure's late father's dementia against poems about the struggle of Galician peasants against the invasion of the armies of Napoleon, and also defends the human pull towards happiness, sovereignty, and living itself. Erín is also the author of over 40 books of poetry, essays, memoir, and translations and co-translations from French, Spanish, Galician, and Portuguese into English. Recent works include Planetary Noise, Selected Poetry of Erín Moure, which is Wesleyan 2017, Sitting Shiva on Minto Avenue by Toots, published by New Star in 2017, a translation of the French Franglish, I love that word, of the Portunal of Wilson Bueno's Paraguayan Sea, published by Nightboat Books in 2017, and also a reissue of her 1988 book, Furious, published by Anansi in 2018, which also originally won the Governor General's Award for Poetry in 1988. A recent bit of good news that we just had is that Erín was also just nominated for a 2021 Governor General's Award for her translation of Chantal Neveu's This Radiant Life. And also, so exciting, the French translation of her book, Sitting Shiva on Minto Avenue by Toots, was also nominated. Yay for Erín. Erín Moure holds 2 honorary doctorates from universities in Canada and Spain. She was the 2017 WPR Creative Fellow at the Woodbury Poetry Room at Harvard, the 2019 International Translator in Residence at the Queen's College at Oxford, a 2020 Kelly Writers House Fellow at UPenn, and most recently in 2021 gave what I think is a very spectacular talk as the Leslie Scalapino Memorial Lecture in Innovative Poetics at Naropa University. And if you are interested, Erín has actually posted a lecture, part of the lecture as a PDF on her website. So I've linked to the website in the comments if you'd like to check that out as well. Welcome, Erín, welcome. So really happy to have you here today.
Welcome, Sandy. I'm happy to be here. It's kind of fun to virtually be in Winnipeg, although I'd be happy to really be there. But the virtually making the whole world into Winnipeg is kind of fun as well. And today I don't know if I'm going to take on the big questions because I'm going to mostly read from a new chapbook. I put a link in the chat, Retooling for a Figurative Life. It's just out from Vallum Poetry Magazine. They do a series of chapbooks. So this is number 32. And it's a series of poems I wrote between March and May last year when I was just alone in my house. I don't know why, but I was alone in my house. And so I decided to see if I could write anything. I hadn't actually been writing poems for a while, and I succeeded in writing a series of them. But I'm going to start off by reading one text of the Napoleonic texts from the Elements that you were describing. And I'll read from the chapbook, and then I'm going to conclude with one poem anyways from Chus Pato's The Face of the Quartzes, which I'll be launching on November 9th virtually. You can find the information on Facebook. It's at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And I'll be talking with the publisher of these books and answering any questions people have. And as well, there'll be some videos of Choo's reading, which are really totally marvelous, and me reading in English as well. So I'll close with one poem from Choo's. So to start then, one of the reasons why these Napoleonic war poems are in my book about the elements about my dad is because the Napoleonic War was an obsession of his. He always wanted to talk about the Napoleonic War. And we hit a certain point where the American, I guess, armed forces or military archives had put uploaded a whole bunch of stuff and made it accessible on the web about various battles and stuff, things like that. And there was enough information that I could kind of trace the path of my dad's ancestor in this mine, who fought in that war as a Galician in the Galician army in Spain. So we're talking 14th of July, 1808, Medina de Rio Seco. In fact, La Cuesta tried to retreat from the French of Napoleon on the plains at Rio Seco to salvage his own Castilian army, and so ordered the 4th Division of Blake's Galicians as fodder to the fray, including Pascual Moure, to cover his retreat and reception where these are separate and where they coincide. In translation or otherwise, necessarily involves the body. Following developments in feminist and performance critical theory since the 1970s and 1980s, we now recognize more freely the polyvalent nature of bodies and social demarcations of gendering, the existence of cultural markings on the body, and the impossibility of saying the body without immediately problematizing the term. The infinitely transmissible of Derrida, which we could call poetry without staking out an origin, or poetry in translation without staking out a difference between this and poetry, demands this polyvalent body. It demands compositional loops that enter the transmission processes differentially, transversely, through bodies, yes, but other polyvalent bodies. Not the reified, bordered bodies that we bring singly to the doctor to report physical pain, which is, yes, a sign that the body we reify does exist as such, but bodies each without one set of organs. A body is prostheticized as it aestheticizes language and acts of language. Language is also a prosthesis. And then as to repeat the date, 14th of July, 1808, Medina de Rio Seco. So there's a whole series of those poems in which classical philosophy meets the military history of Galicians fighting against Napoleon. So this wonderful little chapbook is just out. It's going to be launched in person, I think, in Montreal on December 1st. And I'm going to read you a bit from it, retooling for a figurative life. So you have to, these poems are all written by somebody who's sitting by themselves in an apartment, never gets to visit anybody. Fireflies. I'm trying to remember where things come from, and I think they come out of the ground. This smoke-colored glass bowl came out of the ground. This resin of coffee came out of the ground. The flour and egg I mix came out of the ground. All pigeons come out of the ground. My mother, when I remember her, comes out of the ground. A poem I read this AM came directly out of the ground. I wash my face in ground and drink its light and its taste. Hello, hello, of smoke and absence. Punctuate. To punctuate is to sever a tie that could not be between a clause and clauses or words and words. To punctuate is to refuse a trip between somewhere and nowhere else because of understanding and its need to refute ambiguity or operations of harm which are conducted every day, everywhere. See that man on the street rocking with a Timmy cup on the ground in front of him? Give him a $2 bill. In a past life, he was a boy. Girl. If I lie just so in the bed, the fact that I am a mammal means self-generated heat out of corpuscles and metabolism. I can watch the sun rise into the tree branches from here. Now it is March, sunlight hits the window frame too. I can just lie here and the world is like that. Plus I am warm. Warm-blooded and warm. Sky. I have to stop reading the news that keeps telling me I'm going to die. Normally I would have broken that line into two. I'm going to die, but it annoys me that it has to be every day in the news. I want to read the news of something else. I need to learn something I don't already know. If I am going to die, I want the knowledge to die with me. Which brings me back to everything comes out of the ground. Wouldn't you know it? I am sky crazy. This poem here has images in it that are part of the poem. There's images of some guys building a wooden structure, and there's the cover of a book called The Long Trail, the 341st Engineers on the Alaska Military Highway, 1942 to 1943. This is called Sekeni. I just want to mention the name of a river, name for the people of the rocks in the days after biplanes and solar flares. Go Google it. Or Sekani, closer to Tsakani or Tsakandeni, if you like spelling things right, or at least better. It's a fast river. Sekani chief to you. The 95th bridged it in 1942 in just 3 days. Segregated Black US troops, diggers and haulers, girders, dreamers. I just want to mention grounds glacial, permafrost here. P.S. The Long Trail 341st Engineers on the Alaska Military Highway 1942 to 1943, Charlotte, North Carolina, Herald Press 1944, makes no mention that Black soldiers had any role in spanning the fierce, sickening Chief River. Bridge. List as boats do, going under. False pedestal. Positionality. Going through the middle, face to high water. Apiary bees, buzzing where they pleased. Detour. Orbiting a star is just one of the jobs. We do it with 7.8 billion others, getting close to 10. Firefighters on the plains of Canada with their rural shudders or regrets. The ones they could not pull alive from out of the grain bin. 3 girls, just playing. Never could drive past that farm again, she said. Glad. I said, you said they said. Rainbows had gutted us, horses, apples, a lake pushed to earth by a cloud, broom grass in a meadow, oh glad common wheel, fingers of dew shining wet on the fence rails. I love you forever, complex person, signed me. I don't care if they did say I say. Between us, CP, the names of true friends. Jam. If cartography is an immense responsibility, aren't cartwheels? Both take place on the ground. These days, these trick questions, these, like the words of commiseration she'd utter brightly, picking you up off the ground and dusting the gravel gently out of the knee scrape. There, she'd say, as if an easement or alignment of a house corner or off in a field, so that when the sun rises, it peeks round and lights up a certain, rhubarb. These. Valleys. From the ground up, she's a mighty fine specimen of tree. Ground up, it makes great coffee, she wrote. Later, her sister in Fort Somewhere sent her a postcard of the English factory, then rang her up. After the war, it was retooled from Bren gun to the Ringer washer. We stood under the basement stairs and put endless wet clothes through it, also trying it out on the arm of the younger brother. Everything incomprehensible today occurred earlier in a very short life, she said. Mardi Gras. Simplicity keeps its own sandwich. Phil. If life has a cost, it also has if in the middle. Politicians who do throw us under the bus, goodbye to you and you, they sing, but we are resistant to emptiness of particles, emptiness of afternoons, a May afternoon. We must be at altitude. There's still ice here. Our boot prints behind us wait for us to stop looking downhill and instead to step onward as if crunching snow. Beside. If only living beside a tree would make a difference. Just say it. Excuse me, I live beside a tree. Does anyone else seize up crying? Artifice won't do. Red. At times I wear my hat. Remembering Faith L. in 1977 yelling out, I wear it to keep my head together. So all Tuesday, I wore my hat. All Wednesday, I wore my hat. Thursday, my hat? Where is my hat? Red hat. Oh no. I look for it now on every head. And there's about 4 more poems in Retooling the Figurative Life. My little chapbook about figuring out how to live before, in the middle, or after a pandemic. Face of the Quartzes. I'm going to read you the poem at the beginning and perhaps one other short one here. I'm just going to read my English translation. It's a bilingual book, so Chusparo's Galician is on the left-hand side. Mine English is on the right. This is a poem called that is for Xavier Cordal. At the south face of the bridge, the swifts trace a dense lattice with their flight, then exceed it. That's how the natal lifts up its gaze. It's untamed, as is my stroll out where there's just granite and water and sand. Wild is that humanity utters words. Wild is the attention you bring to listening. The line before which, without hope, you keep your eyes shut, seeds. Now don't fall to the side of darkness. Try to understand. Here's just one small one. Bend, words. Be sky for the delta and the rain that rice paddies reflect to you. Be bore, hair, and stone. Construct value. And one night, between 1 year and another year, I begged the olive trees. Sustain the one that returns, clings to the trunk, and does not belong. So thank you, everybody, for listening to the poems. See if Sandy will come back.
I'm back. That was great. Thank you so much. I feel honored. It's so different to hear you read the poems. It adds an entirely different layer to what's on the page, you know? But I also just, a lot of lines stuck with me. Language is also a prosthesis was one of them. And this is what often happens with your work, which is I thought, oh, what does prosthesis really mean? And in looking it up, I see that it's not only an artificial body part, but I also love this I'm sure you know this, the linguistics, the addition of a letter or a syllable at the beginning of the word, as in Spanish, escribo, derived from the Latin scribo. Absolutely perfect, obviously, for what you're talking about. It just made me think a little bit about another quote that is in this this interview in ARC, that where you said, constructs always leave out. So I think in some ways it's important to call attention to the construct. Not that there should only be one way to do that, but that there should be some way. And I know my students have been thinking about, how much do you call attention to the construct of your language or to the construct of your book as a whole? I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about how you sort of figure out how much of the construct should be obvious to readers and how much, like the word prosthesis, they should look up themselves?
Well, you can write, you can look up things. And if we only wrote always in the language that people already understand, then all poems would be go, Sally, go, 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 run, Sally, run, 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 run. We would never get past the first words. Mostly we exist using a palette of about 300 to 500 words. That's the language of advertising. The vocabulary of advertising is very small. And if all we read is advertising or things we understand, then we cramp our ability to use vocabulary. And if we do that, we cramp our ability to think. So that, prosthesis to me is not, I've always said language is a prosthetic gesture. I think that appears in Au Citadin as well, is that it does not belong to us. It's like Derrida says, language is ours, but does not belong to us. It's that one body part that it kind of plays that role. It's part of our bodies. It's the way we make sense of other bodies and make sense of our bodies in space. So I don't know. I think it's fun to come up against a word that you might not know what it means or why it applies in this situation, and try and think a little bit about why that might be. And or else turn the page and then come back later and think later, or never think, whatever, that's poetry permits that.
And also, I was just thinking about Harriet Mullen talking about how, some people would read her poems and they'd get Bessie Smith lines, and then other people would get Sappho lines. And she said, that's exactly what I want. I want the reader to have as much autonomy as the writer, that they participate in the meaning making of the piece.
Well, they always do, because I always say that what's the difference between a book, like this book? What's the difference between this book and a block of wood this size and shape painted with these pictures? What's the difference? Is there a difference? The difference is a reader can open this one. So it all depends on the reader. Otherwise, books are no different than blocks of wood, painted blocks of wood.
I love it.
Because we don't know, the reader pays attention in the way they're going to pay attention, and you can only pay attention out of your cultural training. You can try and expand that by listening and by reading, which are more important than talking, really. We talk about what we already know. We can't be learning while we're talking, so sometimes we need to shut up.
Yeah, and I think also that there's value in going, people, demanding smart readers and saying, go ahead, go look it up, figure it out for yourself, which is.
Well, I think I say don't talk down to your readers, because they're probably just as smart as you are. And I mean, I've worked all my life with people in kitchens or different places, and I find them very, very smart. So why not write for those smart people that I keep running into on the street?
That's right. Alison Brickey has a question. She said, I really love that poem that kept coming back to Out of the Ground. The repetition was so rhythmic and soothing, every line looping back to the same sound, being grounded again and again. Could you talk a bit about how you use repetition in your writing and what you like about it or what it can do?
Well, the ground appears in various poems in the chapbook, of course. Just the things coming out of the ground. Usually things go into the ground, like when you die, you end up in the ground. But so life comes out of the ground. I just, I can't really say, like, repetition in writing works sometimes to loop things back around. and then sometimes it doesn't. So it's impossible to say. And then it's also very culturally driven. English can tolerate and use repetition more than French can, for example. It looks bad to repeat things in French, whereas in English, it doesn't. And I notice some people, depending on their education, they like repetition more or less. You know, I find things, but so it's interesting repetition. It brings you back, and you realize it brings you back to earlier parts of the poem or earlier parts of the book, and so that it's part of repetition can be used for purposes of resonance, which resonance in language means, which is what we're all trying to get, some resonance when we're writing poetry or another type of text, means that something is happening in the language that goes past just goes beyond what is just being said denotatively at that point. That we recognize that things are related, you know.
Why would you say that it looks worse in French? Do you mean it actually visually looks strange?
No, I mean, francophones will edit out, like I get edited both in French and in English because I write in both languages, and I use repetition on purpose in my Englishy way in French, and it gets edited out.
Oh, okay.
English, it would be left. And I just, like in English, people don't use repetition in the same way.
Interesting.
It's a cultural thing.
Okay. Julie, so a similar question, the inspiration for the ground motifs. But another question, how did your writing practice change or transform through the pandemic lockdowns? I feel like that's a great question because I've spent most of the pandemic just staring at the wall and not being able to do very much. So how did you write about it? How did this happen?
Well, I just wrote things down because I think I needed more language around me. I've been translating so much. Wasn't actually writing poetry for a couple of years. And I just decided to let myself write poems and not criticize them and just see what would come out. And I ended up writing things that are kind of minimalist, and they're just about being in the house, really. They're all those poems are written. There's some memories and stuff, but everything is written from inside the house, which I did go outside and I could walk around in circles in the park with one other person in the hardest part of the lockdown. But in my house, I was the only person. So I think it was just trying to do something useful with myself. That you know, you're sitting in the house and you've got all kinds of stuff to do, and you've got a big long list, but you don't want to do any of it. You know, and I kept, you know, obsessively reading the newspapers, you know, a year and a half ago, like everybody else, and trying to learn something. Anyways, it was, what came out of it was this little chapbook, and Valum had been asking me for a chapbook for a while. They're really great folks at Valum, which is a wonderful Montreal literary magazine. And so I thought I would write the poems I wrote during that time. I thought this will be that chapbook.
That's great. I see that Eleni is also in the Zoom. So
yeah,
Eleni
we said hi in the
Val. I also have a chapbook in the same series that I believe it's the same series that Erin is, and they make beautiful chapbooks. You should all consider sending your chapbooks to Valum as well.
Yeah, we do a call for chapbooks and things, but they did a really nice little job, and I'm happy with it. And these poems, actually, there's I think 100 copies for sale of this thing, but the poems will not appear in any other book. They're just for that chapbook.
Did you have any ritual to writing the pieces? Like, a lot of my students have been asking me for some way to keep writing during the pandemic because they feel they've been stifled so much by having to stay in the house, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I don't know. I use a notebook and with no lines on it and a pencil. So I write down a few things, and then I cross most of it out, and then I start again, you know, until it kind of accumulates enough to be a little poem. I just did it with my coffee before. It was partly to stop myself from reading the BBC first thing in the morning and getting depressed, you know, or discouraged or whatever. I just wanted to start off to make some language, and then to try and see where it would take me.
That's great. And I think we've linked to the Valum chapbook as well. So
yeah, it's in the chat somewhere near the top. I think I put it there to start off with.
Great. Okay, just a couple more questions. Derek, in Elements, I love the push and pull I felt from your narrative voice becoming most strong in Portrait of Pasquale, which is stunningly beautiful. Which craft elements did you use to create this dynamic smoke and mirrors relationship with your reader?
I don't know.
It's hard to
Everything.
isolate your own craft elements, right?
Yeah, I don't even know if I have any. So I did. But I mean, well, the portrait of Pasquale I can talk about that I wrote. I wrote that poem because my dad, once I got all that information on all these battles and stuff, and I figured out from the like the medals for valor, for bravery that Pasquale Moure got, I figured out what brigade he was in and what division, because he got a citation for valor at a battle where his division was not there, but his little brigade was, because they were guarding some guns. So that was, I knew from, anyways, it was just like military history. And I reduced all the military history I'd learned to 13 pages of notes, which I sent to my dad, but he told me on the phone his dementia was already, he could not focus to figure it out. He could not understand the pages. So I wanted to give him a way to understand. And so I decided to write the history of Pasquale in Galician to the rhythm of a march, like a military march. And then I translated it into English for my dad. And when I read the portrait of Pasquale to my dad, then he could understand the poem, because like with other brain damage, rhythm, we don't lose our sense of rhythm and our sense of music, and it helps us to connect with meaning. So it's not just narrative in that poem, Derek, which is, I like your question. It's because we can never get rid of narrative. All my poems are narrative. Narrative just means connecting one thing to the other. But what carries that poem is that march rhythm.
That's great. Anna said, your reading inspires me. What new writing excites you?
Oh, choose Pato all the time. Yeah, choose Pato, and there's other people in Galicia. I've been reading more in Galician. So there's people like Gonzalo Hermo, Oriana Mendez, and going back to older poets as well. And then Caroline Bergvall, who's continuously doing amazing work, who we're going to talk to her, grab her on Zoom on November 20th and talk about her practice, which is, wow, like you want to know something about that. And otherwise, Lisa Robertson always interests me. But also, you know what? One of my favorite things is Rob McClellan's, his Ottawa poet and producer of chapbooks and things. He runs a little magazine that's completely unsubsidized, so he can do whatever he wants, called Touch the Donkey. And if you look for him on Facebook or look for him on his blog, you can subscribe to Touch the Donkey. And it's a magazine that's like a chapbook. It's no bigger than that. So you get, I don't know, 2 or 3 issues a year. And I really love reading that, because every time I read it from cover to cover, and I learn about a new writer who I've never heard of, or many writers, because there'll be a few poems by people that you've heard of, and there's lots of poems by people I've never heard of. So but I really enjoy having access to these little snippets of new work. I feel like I'm connected to reality when I read Touch the Donkey. And it's not a big fat magazine that you have to take a dog's age to read. So I recommend subscribing to Rob's mag.
Rob's great at connecting different new writers that I've never heard of. That's sort of what Erin was saying, is like it's a mix, I think, of more established writers and really young writers who just submit out of the blue to the magazine that he publishes, which is amazing.
And from the USA too, and in England, if somebody, or other English speaking places, or anybody who is writing something in English, plus he does translations. He's published translations of mine, of Lucio Noveneira, of mine and Roman Ivashkiv's, of Yuri Izdrik. He's interested in translations and things like that, and have worked from outside of Canada. This is very rare to find in Canadian magazines, because the Canada Council rules indicate that you can only use your funding to publish Canadians. So it shuts us off from the rest of the world. It takes people like Rob, who publish magazines out of their own pocket, that to be able to not have to follow those rules, so he can bring us these other people and these other things. So people retouch the donkey in the USA, they retouch the donkey elsewhere. That's another reason why it's great. It's not just confined to the Canadian environment.
And that's another great thing about this residency as well. We're not particularly bound to the Canada Council, so we can do this international writers panel, which is sort of the same idea, right? Which is like, how do we get, one of the things I noticed being in the UK and the US is that we're just not as connected as we could be.
And that people say, well, they don't know what's happening in Canada, except for, you know, me, Lisa, like the people who do things internationally. But it's not because like we're the greatest thing since unsliced bread or whatever, you know. It's because we wander across those borders and we disobey the rules that say you can't do this or you can't do that. Mm-hmm. But and it's really important. I mean, the USA, for example, even though there's 10 times the population, the national literary culture is kind of like ours. There's a few people who everybody knows, but there's also the poetry cultures are mostly regional, you know, or across different interest groups will unite them in a sense. I don't mean really interest groups, but different people who have things in common that cross regions, like trans authors or gay and lesbian authors. In particular, will know people from all over the country, but the other people are more in their own area. Anyways, it's kind of fun. The poets in the United States are great people, so it's really good to be able to exchange with them.
Yeah, it's shocking. In the UK, they only knew Margaret Atwood and Michael Ondaatje, and they thought Margaret Atwood was American. So
yeah, well, that's it. But there's a certain layer of culture that just circulates like that, but that's not culture. Those people are they're like a bit of the foamy milk on top of the cappuccino, but there's no caffeine in there. That's not what you want. Some caffeine, go somewhere else.
Right. Anyway. I wanted to ask you about translation. No one's asked about translation, and I wondered.
Let's see what these people they did ask some. There's more questions.
There's more questions. Wait, hold on.
Here's Samantha asked me, do you ever deal with imposter syndrome? Oh, I'm a complete fake. So how do you mitigate it? Well, I was lucky because I have my mom, who's no longer with us, but she still rules me from the beyond. And she always used to say, she was not much of a reader, but she would say, when I seemed to be getting too smart, she'd say, the grass is writing too, you know. So she would remind me that I'm no better than a stem of grass, that me and a stem of grass are equals. And that's actually kind of calming to think that I'm just one of those pieces of grass. I think that people can have this idea that about success that's not a very useful idea. Basically, I do my little bit of work. I feel like I'm working on a big quilt. Canadian poetry is a big quilt, and I'm working on it with everybody else, and I can feel the tug as they're making their stitches, and I probably cause a few tugs too, but I'm just trying to do my corner as best I can so that it looks good with the rest of the quilt. You know.
That's great. Keely says, how do you keep a theme? Sorry, if there's more questions that I can't see, just let me know. But Keely says, how do you keep a theme for an entire book of poems without exhausting yourself or the topic?
Oh, I probably don't try. I mean, I see what kind of things emerge from language, because it's like as I talk to people if you come to visit me and we talk about some of your work, I say, like, where's the strong language? Where's language really working? How can we generate this piece so that language keeps working? And I always say, let language be your guide. Language will show you where to go. So I don't worry about having to keep my hand on the rudder, you know, to keep going in one direction. Sometimes the direction I want to go is absolutely the wrong direction for the book. I have to learn from the language.
Someone who wasn't here tonight wanted me to just ask a similar question, I guess, which was, how do you bring in additional threads if you feel like your narrative isn't robust enough? Do you experiment by bringing in different threads?
Well, I try to see where language is taking me, because you can always add more narrative. You can always make narrative clearer, so that I say, yeah, add some more threads. Or if language is saying, let's go in this direction, and you go, oh no, that's a thread. I want a whole shirt or nothing. You should definitely go and see where language wants to bring you, because sometimes language is telling a different story than the one you're trying to tell, and it's actually a bigger story. It's a better story.
That's great. Okay. I wonder, how did your relationship with language change as you reached toward your father's experience? It's a great question.
Well, I think like the book, The Elements, also includes a lot of my thinking on what it is like to be a translator. And I think somehow like the language that my dad was capable of, I just treat it, instead of treating it as him as having a deficient language or a damaged language, I just treated him as having a language, and I didn't judge it. Like when I translate from French, I don't judge French. When I translate from Galician, I don't judge Galician. So I just accepted what my dad had to say as being his language and way of saying things, and that he lived in a world where the things in his language were true, and I had to adjust my set accordingly instead of trying to get him to adjust his set. Like in the book, in the poem where I ask him if he wants me to fix his clocks, because he has 3 clocks, they're all on absolutely different times, not just on time zones, but different times. And as if some are fast and some are slow, and one is out of whack completely. And he said to me, no, don't touch my clocks. So I won't, but like, how do you know what time it is? 3 different times. How do you know what time it is? And he said, I average them. And I thought, because he was kind of a mathematical guy, so that made sense to me. But I thought the average of these times is not the time. But why should the time on my watch be the time? Like, who said the time is the time? We have 2 times and we're living in our times, so I just got along with my dad. I just learned that, Ron.
That's also something about like caring for, I know they say with Alzheimer's patients, like to enable their reality, right? Part of the care is to not to deny their reality as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But their reality is just as real, not to pretend, oh, it's not a real reality, but I'm not going to deny it. It's to like open your heart to it as a real place, when we did that, people also can hook into other people's brains if they don't feel anxious. So he would be able to describe to me some of the things his life was doing to him in this state if I just sat quietly with him for a long time, which he had to teach me, because I'd say, I better go. Like, you're just sitting there with your eyes are shut, and Dad, you want to have a nap. He'd be like, no, don't go.
It's a different way of listening.
Yeah, it is a different way of listening. And so it's like his language taught me how to listen. I had to follow his language instead of trying to see the world just through my language, which is what you do when you're translating,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just going to ask you, somebody sent me a quote that said you said at one point that the only relevant translation is a culturally relevant translation. I'm not sure where you said that or what talk it was in, but do you have a theory of translation? One of my students wanted to know if you had a sort of theory of.
Oh, I have many theories that are combined of all the theories, but I mean, like a translation is, if it's not culture, it loses culture. Translations lose cultural relevance with time, and that's why people retranslate things. Mm-hmm. Like the Iliad, we don't read Alexander Pope's translation of the Iliad anymore. It's not readable to us, or if we read it, it reads like Alexander Pope, not what we want Homer to read like. But original texts just get footnoted. Translations get retranslated.
Right, or those dreadful texts of Sappho translations where one line is translated into an entire sonnet.
Yeah, but that's like, I call that hyper translation. It's deciding, like translating Rosalia de Castro, a 19th century Galician poet, you could see more if you don't try to make her rhyme in iambic pentameter in English, because she rhymes, but rhyme plays a completely different role in Galician. which is a very rhymey language, than it does in English, where it's harder to rhyme and where you can end up sounding artificial really quickly. In Galician, you can rhyme, and it's a kind of rhythmic or sound effect. But it's not hard to do. It doesn't detract from what you're going on about,
Right. Are there any texts that you recommend for someone who wants to start translating but isn't sure how to go about it? Like, is there any books that you would suggest to start with?
Well, Lawrence Venuti, he's like wrote in the 70s, his early work. Lawrence Venuti's work on translation and on, he divides translation into two categories, which aren't actually categories to us today. But there's also, like, I wrote a whole bunch of little small articles on translation on the website for, what was that magazine? It was Australian and then is with Penn now.
Cordite?
No.
No? Okay.
Before Cordite. Anyway, can't think of it. But there's also, like, there's a little article on translation in Planetary Noise called the Emit. And I do introductions and or postscripts to most of my translations, so you can look up these books in the library. You don't have to even spend any money, and you can see some of what I think about translation through that. As well, in the essay book that came out about 11 years ago, My Beloved Wager, there's a whole section of my articles on translation. But other than that, you just have to keep looking out for things, really. Yeah.
That's great. We've just got two more, and then I'm obviously the time is getting.
Okay. Yeah. There's a few more questions here.
But got Max. In light of your comments regarding your father's reaction and increased comprehension to rhythm, how much do you attempt to incorporate rhythm and/or rhyme in your poetry to reach your audience?
Well, I more think of rhythm apart from rhyme, like, because to me we have a certain idea about rhyme as end rhyme in our culture, but in other cultures rhyme is not end rhyme. It can be the repetition of an O sound that runs through an entire text. It can be a repetition of different sounds. It can be not just off rhyme, but where the rhyming word occurs in the middle of the second line and not at the end of it. And even in the ghazal, the Persian form, the rhyme, the way rhyme works in that originally did not have to do with end rhyme. So there's many, many, many different kinds of rhymes and ways of making rhyme and rhythm work. All I know is that I'm a bit more unconventional, as Max already knows, in my use of rhyme, which Max, he probably uses in his poetry more conventionally, but to great effect. The conventional is not exhausted by any means, So I think you reach somebody's insides when sounds work. I always love to read poems aloud. I read them aloud when I'm writing them, and I get people to read their poems aloud to me. You need to do that.
Great. Okay. Hi, Erin. I think this is the last one. I loved hearing you read your work. I just wanted to ask about how and when do you come to the point where you feel your work is finished? That's a good question. When do you know it's ready to be shared and published?
Never. Never. You just get to a certain point where you can't do anymore, I think. And then some of it's ready to be shared, and then some of it's ready to be published because somebody wants to publish it with whom you've shared it, says that they will. And some people say, no, Erin, not this, please. So it's, I don't know, until when I've learned enough from the language, and I can't learn anymore, and it's not language's fault, it's Erin's, it's my own limitations, then kind of I feel like the work is finished. And then I have to work on something else, or work on something else from a different angle. That's all.
I know Dionne Brand used to say that the next book that she wrote was answering a question that she didn't answer in the last book. Do you feel that that's true?
Quite often, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like, say, Kapusta, my book Kapusta came out of the unmentionable. I wasn't able to look at the Alberta, a whole section of, how did how did World War II in Ukraine seem from Alberta, and to my grandmother. And so I was able to address the same set of issues, but through thinking about my grandmother in Kapusta. So that book definitely came out of things I wasn't able to do in the unmentionable, etc. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I think that's all the questions and probably all the time we have. Wow, we're very on time. Thank you so much, Erin. It's such a delightful evening. It's so wonderful to speak to you. And
thanks, everybody. Thank you.
I'll just plug one more time that on the 20th of November, we have an excellent event with Carolyn Bergvall and Erín Moure in conversation. And I hope you can all join us then. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
It's going to be fun.